Here's a special interview with a man who has worn many hats. Former Army Chief General M.M. Naravne, retired, has come out with a new non-fiction book titled The Curious and the Classified, Unearthing Military Myths and Mysteries. And this is a book that lifts the veil on some of the most riveting and lesser-known stories that have shaped the legends of the Indian Army, Navy and Air Force. It also delves into fascinating subjects such as the fate of INS Kukri and the extraordinary sagas of airmen and their call signs. Without giving you more details and spoilers, it's my pleasure to welcome former Army Chief General M.M. Naravne. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us here in the studio. And of course, before I come to this book, which of course we are going to discuss through the course of this interview, I must begin by asking you about another book that you have written, which has caused a huge amount of furor in the Parliament of India, as you would very well know. What is the status of that book, sir? Has that book been cleared? Because we were told that it has not been cleared by the Ministry of Defence for publication. What is the status of that book, and what would you like to tell us about that controversy?
Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me over to speak to you all about my new book, The Curious and the Classified, and I hope we talk more about this book than on other subjects. But to get back to the question that you have asked, the matter is still between the publisher, that is Penguin, and the Ministry of Defence as far as the clearance for the book is concerned. And the matter rests there.
Right. You had put out a clarification at that point of time, sir. You had posted the status of Penguin Random House. You had said that the book has not gone into publication. No copies of the book in print or digital form have been published, distributed, sold or otherwise made available to the public by Penguin Random House India. The question on many people's minds is, how did such a transcript then leak into the public domain, get published in a magazine, for instance? What is your understanding of what has transpired?
I guess there are many steps in the publication process. You submit a Word document, then it goes for a number of iterations, corrections, editing, gets converted to a PDF format. So there are many steps. It is not that the steps had not gone through, but the bottom line is that it was not published, and that is where the matter rests. It was not published, and therefore, if anybody has access to it, it is in an unauthorized manner that access has been taken, and we should not give cognizance to that.
So it's a leaked copy, a review copy? Which version, at what stage do you believe this has happened?
I wouldn't know, because as I mentioned in an interview earlier, I myself have not seen a copy of my own book. How other people have seen that copy?
So before it was submitted, you didn't get the manuscript of it, of the book? Before it was submitted to the Ministry of Defence?
A completed copy like this has not been seen by me. So how are people showing it around?
Now, one of the reasons that this became increasingly controversial is that this is what Rahul Gandhi said, and I'm quoting him exactly. He said in February that Narendra Modi ji did not fulfill his responsibility. General Naravne has written it clearly that he felt really alone and that he was abandoned by the entire establishment. Is this a correct interpretation of whatever you have written in the book?
No, I cannot comment on the particular quote or where he has taken it from. As I said, the copies, wherever it might have, and you can, if you hack into something, you can also change the contents. So I cannot comment on those contents, but I can certainly say that when you're given a free hand to carry out your task, that is in no way saying that you're alone. In that respect, you're expected to do your job, and it is a measure of the confidence that the government has on its armed forces and the leadership of the armed forces, that they are absolutely certain that the decision that will be taken will be a correct decision. It has to be seen in that light,
right, and
not in the way it has been interpreted by various quarters.
Right. Because they have quoted you as saying you made calls to Mr. Rajnath Singh, to Mr. Ajit Doval, General Rawat, Dr. S. Jaishankar, and to each and every one, my question now, what are my orders? Is this exactly what has happened? Is this factually correct in terms of at least what has been quoted?
No, as I said, that discussions are ongoing. The decisions don't happen out of the blue. Discussions are ongoing over days, weeks. And at the end of the entire set of deliberations, the directions are that take action as a military operation. Because at the end of the day, it is a military operation, and the military man knows best what can be done with the resources at your disposal. So there is always a political direction. But within that political direction, it is complete freedom of operations at the military level. And, you know, as they say in management, tell somebody what to do, not how to do it.
Right.
So that is the distinction.
Right.
So the how is totally in your hands.
So interestingly, the same article later mentions that, you know, medium tanks were advanced from the Indian side, and later the lighter tanks from the Chinese side had to stop in their ranks because they were not any match for India's tanks that were there. So would you say that this is a decision that, you know, you took, empowered by this, response that you got from the central government?
I think all these facts have been reported in the media when these incidents happened. So why there is again discussion on these when they have hundreds, not hundreds, but dozens of articles been written on this subject and covered in various news channels. Why are we rehashing old things? That is the old thing now. I think we should move ahead.
Right. Sir, but why do you think it is that the book, it's now about 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me if I'm wrong, since the book was submitted for publication. Why do you think it is that the book's clearance has not come? Is it because the matter itself is so sensitive, or and what would you say about the process of clearance when it comes to such books written by eminent personalities such as yourself, which are linked to national security and the defense?
As I said that, you know, I have submitted the manuscript to the publishers, and the publishers are in touch with the MOD for its clearance. So that is where the matter rests. How long it takes, it's not really for me to comment on that. I had immense satisfaction from writing the book, and I'm satisfied with that. You know, it was a process. But let me also say that it was never my intention to write a memoir or autobiography. It just happened. So it's not on any notes that I made. It is just my recollection of how events transpired. Those recollections may be different from recollections of other people. So they may have a different view of exactly how it happened. So that's perfectly all right. So it was just a way of my putting things across. And therefore, perceptions can differ at the level that you are looking at things.
Right.
The same thing which is being looked at a brigade commander will look different to him, which is being looked at by me will look different. Looked at the political level will look different, diplomatic level will look different. So obviously there will be various perceptions of the same event, and all of them are equally correct. It is not that one is correct or one is wrong. There is there are various versions of the truth are possible.
True.
And therefore, as I said, the book is there or not there, and we've moved on. I've written a murder mystery, the cantonment conspiracy. I've moved on from there. I've written this book now. So let us look to the future and not keep dwelling in the past. And because these questions now have been asked last year also, when I gave interviews of my previous book, the same questions were asked. So how long will we, keep asking the same things and expect a different answer?
Right. I've just a few more points to clarify, and then we move on to your other book. When you say this, it just sort of happened. How did it happen? Did the publisher approach you? Did somebody suggest you that you should write your memoirs, or did you feel the need to actually record it? How did it just happen? Can you explain that to us?
So that's quite interesting. And Rachna Bisht had written a book on General Rawat.
Right.
And the launch of that book was in the USI. And I was also one of the speakers at that event, since I had taken over from General Rawat, and we were very good friends. And of course, his death and that crash affected me also very deeply. So when we were, after that event, when we were just discussing with the publishers and all, I said, you're written a book on General Rawat, मेरे बारे में तो कुछ लिखा ही नहीं है. More in jest. And that is when they said that if you write, we will publish. So it just started that way. And that is why I say I had no intention of writing it anything, nor were there any notes or anything that I referred to. So that is the genesis of the whole book. But once I got into it, I also made reference to the same news articles which are in the open domain to refresh my memory.
Right.
So there is nothing new in what I have written.
Right. Do you feel that this issue should have come up in Parliament at all, if there was no official sanction, if there was no official clearance?
I don't think so, and we keep saying that about politicization of the armed forces. If you bring such issues, non-issues in fact, then you're unnecessarily dragging the armed forces into politics. And then you should not, then in the same breath, say that armed forces are being politicized. Because we are very clear in our minds, the armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, that we are totally apolitical. And that is the way we would like to remain. And to ensure that we remain so, it's best not to get dragged into these unnecessary controversies.
How does this affect morale, for instance?
Whether as an organization or an individual, whether serving or retired, we are best kept out of this Rajniti.
Does it impact on morale? Does it raise questions of professionalism? Why do you say that it's best kept out in that sense, if I may ask you? As somebody who served at the highest level.
No, because we are Bharat ki Sena, Bharatiya Sena, Bharat ki Sena. We are the army of the country. And that is how we would like to remain. We would protect the national interest first and foremost. When we take our oath on the Constitution of India to uphold the Constitution. That is our ethos, that is our bread and butter. And that is how we have functioned. And that is what differentiates us from all the countries on our borders. What makes our army so professional? It is because we have stayed out of politics. And that is the way we should remain.
Right. And do you think that this kind of interpretation or misinterpretation, whatever one chooses to call it, this is something that has been done for the sake of politics, and that is something which was avoidable in that sense?
Yeah, as I said, why unnecessarily drag the armed forces into politics? We are best kept away from it.
So, do you regret that episode, the fact that it was politicized so heavily?
Actually, it didn't affect me much. I was happy with my retired life. I go around giving lectures all over the country. I talk to the youth. I give them lessons in leadership and management. I tell them how to become better citizens of India. And the question most often asked is, how can we help? Or what should we do? And the standard reply to that is that be citizens worth dying for. After all, if we are, on the borders, surviving in such difficult climates and laying down our lives if need be, then at least be worthwhile citizens. Let the country be something we can really lay down our lives for. So I'm busy in so many other activities, plus, of course, writing my books, spending time with my family. As during service, I could not spend adequate time with my children. At least now I can spend that much time with my grandchild. Right. So there's so many things to do in the world. Why get bogged down with petty issues?
Right. So one thing is what is stated in the parliament, the political points of view that were put forth. But the original magazine article itself, which caused a huge amount of controversy, has described this as a moment of profound isolation for you. Do you think that this is a correct interpretation, even from the magazine's point of view? No,
it is not isolation in any form whatsoever. But again, there is a saying that's lonely at the top. So as Army Chief is also lonely at the top, it does not mean you're isolated. But ultimately, the decision always rests on one person's shoulder. And in that sense, yes, when you're at the helm of affairs, you have to realize that whatever decision you take is going to affect 12 lakh people who are directly under you. Whatever decision you take is going to affect another 1 billion people who are part of the country. So a decision you take has to be very, very, profound and circumspect, and not in a gung-ho manner. So in that way, this is not isolation. Everybody is, even the CEO of a company is alone at the top.
True.
And that is like General Vijay's book, Alone in the Ring. Does he mean he was alone? No, he had his advisors, he had the men in the command, he had his,
So many have quoted, General Naravne, screenshots that have been shared on social media. In fact, your post is being shared in which it says the book is available for pre-order in 2023. And you're quoted in one of your tweets as saying, my book is available now, just follow the link. Happy reading, Jai Hind. What was all that about then? If the book was not ready to be launched, or why did you put it out on social media?
Pre-orders can be as much as 6 months in advance. That is how publishers, through pre-orders get an idea of how much print copies to run. If the pre-orders go into the thousands, they also know, let's print it in the thousands. If there is not much, response or enthusiasm for that, they'll take out a smaller initial run. So pre-orders are, that is the way of, that is the modus operandi of publishing houses. So pre-order does not mean that it is ready. It is part of the process.
Right. One last question I'll ask you about this entire episode and this article, and then we move on to your new book, because this article also has one claim that you had suggested to NSA Ajit Doval that Chinese provocations at PP14 be brought up in interactions with Chinese foreign minister, and that suggestion or that statement was rejected. Is this factually correct?
I would not like to comment on aspects which are under revision by MOD, because that would not be the proper way of doing things.
Right. Right. So, from the larger perspective, the time where all of this happened to the time where we are now, with China, diplomatically speaking, things are a very different sort of a situation. Yet, as someone who has served at the highest levels of the army, how should India take matters forward? Because it is a fact that it is a disputed border when it comes to China. And how should we avoid any kind of such instances happening in the future?
Well, we have a boundary problem with China, and instances of this kind have been occurring in the past and will surely occur in the future also, where at friction points when troops come face to face with each other, there would be some, garma garmi. But there are protocols in place, there are confidence building measures in place to limit the occurrence of such interactions. And if they happen, then to limit the scale of the violence that may or may not take place.
Right.
So there are processes in place, but seeing the larger picture, definitely if both countries have to move ahead, then it is in both countries' interests to resolve the boundary problem. And I think that it is even more important for China to resolve the boundary problem, to show that to the world that they're a mature player who can take the rightful place. If they keep these kind of irritants in being, then perhaps at the world stage they may not be taken seriously. So I do believe that this boundary dispute can be resolved through negotiation, and both countries' interests, more so for China.
Right. Just one last question, because we're at the anniversary of what has happened in Pahalgam, the terrorist attack, and of course Operation Sindhur itself. When you look at Operation Sindhur, 1 year down the line, what was India able to achieve? What were we able to demonstrate? Because we had very specific targets in terms of what we were able to achieve, and militarily speaking, as a former chief of the Indian Army, how would you reflect back upon it?
Well, definitely, it was an inflection point of Sindhur, that we made a clear distinction between only targeting terrorist camps to also targeting the leadership. If you remember that after Uri, the surgical strikes were only at the boundary, at the LC, a little bit in depth. After Pulwama, Balakot strikes were again little in depth, but again only on terrorist camps and restricted to POK. This time in Op Sindhur, we widened the canvas and we said that wherever you are, we will hit you. And not just the low-level terrorist, but we will hit your leadership, the ones who are sponsoring that terrorist activity, who are funding that terrorist activity, wherever you might be. And as the defense minister mentioned, ghus ghus ke marenge. That you are not safe anywhere. And that is the radical change that, and the shift in the policy that took place. And I think that is a shift for the better. In fact, in one of the articles which I wrote for print much before Sindhur. I had written this, that hit them where it hurts. And that is exactly what we have done.
Right. Let me come back to your book now. And, one of the interesting points you talk about the traditions of the army. You say that one of the ranks that should be perhaps done away with is the rank of the brigadier, much as the second lieutenant has been done away with. Why do you come to that conclusion?
You see, ranks are a functional requirement. So if it makes sense to have a rank, you have a rank. So the rank didn't come first. The operational and functioning requirement came. And because you have that, you need somebody to control. So you have 4 companies, so you need a battalion commander to control those 4 companies. If you didn't have companies, you would not have. So if you didn't have soldiers, you wouldn't have generals. So
right.
It's not top to bottom, it is bottom to top. And therefore, the rank of brigadier came about because there was a felt need to have one more layer in the decision-making process. And that layer was sometimes necessitated by operational requirements. Those operational requirements could also be the means of communication. And in management, again, delegation of authority, how many people can you control effectively? What is your span of command, span of control? So keeping all those things in mind, it was felt that an intermediary rank and organization of a brigadier and a brigade is required. But so many developments have happened. Now, sitting in this room, you can see what is happening 2,000 miles away. So do you really need so many links? And if so many links are not required, and if one link has to be done away with, which is the best link that can be taken out? And in my view, the link was either the division or the brigade. And therefore, when we are going in for the integrated battle groups, it is brigades which are becoming more powerful and becoming almost like divisions. And integrated battle groups will be commanded by major generals. The IBGs will be commanded by major generals, and that transition is in place. It is happening slowly, steadily. Now, when that happens, so that the rank of brigadier, that position of brigadier, actually a brigade becomes redundant. So if the brigade is not there, and as I've quoted in the book, that in my father's extension collection of military history books, there is that sentence which stuck in my mind. I was idly leafing through the books while just sitting with him one evening, and the sentence was there that the recently reintroduced rank of brigadier.
Okay.
That means the rank was there,
it was
taken out, and it was brought back.
Brought back again.
Because it was required, functionally, operationally. So if there's something is not required, take it out. If it's required, bring it back. So that is how I came to that conclusion. And perhaps that drove it must have been in my subconscious, and also drove some of the reforms which I initiated while in service.
You also refer to a lot of linguistic origin, and I find it interesting that you've mentioned there is a strong Shashi Tharoor connection to this book. Can you explain that for our viewers?
Yes, the connection actually is just the germ of the idea came from, I was leafing through Shashi Tharoor's book, Wonderland of Words, and the chapter I happened to read or skim through was on backronyms, how people invent things. So the example he gives is of SOS, which was actually a simple way of transmitting a distress call. Dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, 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 which is easy for in the era of Morse code. So that stands for SOS. And later on, people made the words of save our souls or save our ships. It did not start. It retrospect. It is reverse engineering. It did not start off that we will do that.
Right.
So when I was reading that, the first thought which came to my mind is of MHOW, MHOW, which many people say is military headquarters of war, which is all bunkum.
Okay.
But that is how history is made.
So before I let you go, I must ask you about the entire West Asia crisis as well. We've seen, a war perhaps unlike any that we've seen in our region, very close to India. There's a very, very sensitive, sort of fragile ceasefire where you hear statements and counter statements coming in back and forth. A lot at stake over here for India. Of course, I can't ask you what you expect in terms of what will happen, because India is certainly not part of the negotiations, but certainly an episode which raises a lot of fears for India, its own energy security, and also has huge implications for India and the role that it plays, internationally speaking. How are you viewing this entire war and its implications for India?
Well, of course, all wars are unfortunate, and force should always be used only as a last resort. And we as a country have always maintained that we must resolve disputes through dialogue, through discussion. And I'm sure this war could have been avoided. Discussions were on. If reports are to be believed, they were actually quite close to a breakthrough. But in spite of all that, the war is broken out. Since the war is actually based on quite some unsound presumptions, I think in that backdrop, the stance that India is following to maintain our strategic autonomy and be ready to play a part if called upon to do so is the best course to follow. And we have to do whatever in the long run. There are short-term interests, there are long-term interests. We have to look is what is going to serve us best in the long term. And in the long term, I think having good relations with all the people in the region is what would be better.
General Naravne, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.